Në rregull? Po, super që stash, po ndëgjojmë. Atëherë përshëndetje të gjithëve, i nderuar ministër Qeku, i nderuar profesor Hedon, të nderuar të pranishëm këtu dhe ju të gjithë që po na ndjekni përmes platformave digjitale. Mirë se vini në Prishtina Music Conference, ngjarje apo konferencë e cila organizohet për herë të parë në qytetin tonë të dashur Prishtinën dhe e cila në vete do të përmbajë kryesisht aktivitete të ndryshme që ndërlidhen me artin e kulturën me fokus në muzikë, duke veçuar diskutime, punëtori, ekspozita, performanca të ndryshme muzikore. Këto pra do të jenë aktivitetet apo ngjarje të cilat do ta karakterizojnë këtë edicion të parë të Prishtina Music Conference, ku kemi me pas kënaqësinë me pas të ftuar folës të ndryshëm e artistë qysh nga dita e parë sot për të vazhduar deri nesër. Po unë për shumë kohë kam kënaqësinë ta ftoj këtu në skenë të na bashkangjitër, ministri jonë i dashur, Hedon Qeku. Mirë se vjen ministër.
Faleminderit Adrian, përshëndetje Hedon, përshëndetje të gjithëve që jeni sonte këtu, nderuar organizator dhe të pranishëm. Më vjen mirë që po takohemi sot në edicionin e parë të Prishtina Music Conference. Muzika së bashku me kinematografinë, unë besoj që përbëjnë dy profilet më të suksesshme në kulturë për promovimin e identitetit tonë shtetëror. Përveç kapacitetit diplomatik, këto dy profile me mbështetje të duhur institucionale janë në proces për të shndruar në fuqi të denja ekonomike në treg të punës. Pas 20 vitesh punë intensive në prodhim muzikor, kapaciteti i cili të tejkalon vetë gjeografinë e Kosovës, tani po i shohim edhe strukturat e para të rëndësishme për qëndrueshmëri të një industrie muzikore të mirëfillt me ngjarje të tilla si Prishtina Music Conference. Sfondi muzikor kosovar ka shumë nevojë për mbështetje në strukturim më të mirë dhe më praktik në nivel ligjor, mbështetje më të qëndrueshme financiare, kapacitete njerëzore të reja profesionale në fushën e mbështetjes teknike, profile të reja dhe struktura për menaxhment muzikor, distribucion dhe infrastrukturë më adekuate fizike për të ushtruar veprimtarinë muzikore. Për të realizuar këto elementet nevojshme për muzikën në Kosovë, ne kemi ndërmarrë hapa konkret në çdo nivel të çështjeve të lartë përmendura dhe ngjarje si kjo sot që po fillon, besoj që ndihmojnë në arritjen më të shpejtë të këtyre synimeve tona të përbashkëta si shoqëri, si institucione dhe si shtet. Jam e bindur që kjo ngjarje do të ketë ndikim shumë pozitiv dhe do të shndrohet në pikë takim për çdo aktor brenda dhe jashtë Kosovës, duke zhvilluar industrinë muzikore në vendin tonë dhe duke i njoftuar të gjithë rajonin dhe vendin me pasuritë e vendit tonë. Ju dëshiroj fillim të mbarë, sukses secilit prej pjesëmarrësve të këtij edicioni dhe të keni sa më shumë edicione në të ardhmen. Ju falenderoj për këtë mundësi.
Po, lirësht, kënaqësi, ministër. Atëherë përveç Hedonit të cilën e kemi sot, i cili në një farë mënyre do të na flet për ekonominë kulturore të skenave muzikore elektronike dhe pse pikërisht skena jonë muzikore nuk e ka të themeluar apo të strukturuar një grup të DJ-ve apo producentëve që përfaqëson këtë lloj muzike. Normalisht duke marrë parasysh traditën e skenës elektronike të kulturës dance club muzikës në Prishtinë. Pas prezantimet e Hedonit, do të kemi rastin pra nga ora 18 të kemi diskutim me Alan Crofton, Bruno Gobrol dhe Gregor O. Halloran e Julia Richel. Pastaj sot në fund kemi pas rastin të shikojmë një prezantim nga Login Koqiski e Vasko Atanovski me temën Ballkani dhe çysh do të me të kalu dhe me udhëheq në vendet e shkatruara kulturalisht nga lufta për 3 dekada. Gjatë ditës së sotme, gjithashtu kishim kënaqësinë me pas 2 performanca paraprakisht në Bibliotekën Kombëtare të Kosovës nga Medina Surdulli, pak më herët një performancë nga multi-instrumentistët e Agenda for Hope dhe një punëtori nga Dragan Kitanov me temën e ardhmja. Ditën e nesërme, pra të shtunën, do të fillojmë nga ora 14 me Dugazin Lipa dhe Gordon Mason me temën suksestorit e vendit tonë. How Kosovo was lifted to the world on a silver platter. Për të vazhdu pastaj me Q&A me temën e shëndetit mendor, një temë shumë e rëndësishme pikërisht në këtë periudhë në të cilën jemi duke kaluar në ballafaqësim me pandeminë, ku do të kemi të ftuar Uran Badivuku, Vigan Behluli, Julia Richard dhe Rosana Karbacho. Shpresoj që nuk ja u shqiptoj emrat në mënyrë të gabuar personave të ftuar. Do të kemi një prezantim nga Daniel Nordgaard në ora 4:15 apo 16:15 me temën Economics and Digital Giants. Për të vazhdu, pastaj me diskutim me komunitetin lokal të shoqërisë civile me temën nostalgjia, mbijetesa e skenës alternative në periudhën e parë dhe pas luftës së vitit 1999, ku si panelist do të kemi Arben Ismail, Benin Islamin, Arif Pehlivanin, Bersant Rizaj, Mentor Shuki dhe Vjosa Shala Loca, e cila na vjen nga Londra. Okej. Një 3-4 faqe të mira, po shpresoj që restazhi isha mirë. Te pi pak ujë Hedon se pas na me luzu kogja shumë. Okej. Po shpresoj që ju në Chicago atje 10 minuta, apo këtu në Prishtinë i shtym ka pak një 5 minuta 10 në Ballkan në përgjithësi, a? Okej. Arti dhe kultura në vendin tonë janë duke kaluar një momentum shumë të rëndësishëm. Në aspektin mikrohistorik, tash 22 vite pas luftës ka qenë një mishmash i zhvillimit të rrymave të ndryshme jo të strukturuar si duhet. Dhe mendoj se këtu kemi shumë të pranishëm të cilët kanë kontribuar që sa do pak skena alternative muzikore mos të vdes dhe besoj që ata mund të flasin shumë më shumë dhe ka njohuri, por unë më duhet të ndalim të rolit të cilën e kanë luajtur Urban FM, more than Spray Club, kolektivet e ndryshme si Andra Modern dhe Service Shelter për të vazhdu pastaj me hapësira të cilët janë duke bërë një punë të jashtëzakonshme, kafiqat e ndryshëm në Prishtinë si Tingle Tangle, Drosa Thyme, Ditënat, Hard Rockers, Prishtina Hard Cafe, edhe normalisht këtu më duhet me përmend gjithsesi edhe ekipin e Zone Club, të cilët kanë arritur që mbrana, si më thonë, një periudhë 5 vjeçare me na sjell DJ, producent të njoftën goxha shumë, botërisht si Solomon, Ricardo Villalobos, Seth Roxer e tjerë. Nëse e krahasojmë në aspektin makrohistorik, tashmë kemi një zhvillim të hofshëm të skenës muzikore, ku ashtu si që ka cek në disa diskutime që i kemi mosur edhe Ministri Qeku, kultura në vendin tonë tashmë e disa vite ka funksionu si mirëqenie sociale. Pra, politika jo të strukturuar mirë nga niveli lokal e qendror, ndarja në fondeve në stilin pak për shumë. Ministria e Kulturës tashmë është duke punuar në strukturim dhe ndryshim të ligjeve të shumta dhe unë dhe komuniteti në përgjithësi jemi të kënaqur dhe të lumtur shumë që janë duke punuar në këtë drejtim. Përndryshe, ka ardhur koha që duhet të mendojmë për ekonominë kulturore dhe cili është rikthimi në investimin që jemi duke bërë. Tashmë kemi disa histori të suksesit dhe këtu padyshim duhet me përmend festivalet të ndryshme kulturore që realizohen në vendin tonë si Sunny Festival, Doku Fest, Anibar e tjera. Pastaj suksesin e filmit Zgjoj të Blerta Bashollit për të vazhdu pastaj me bienalin në Madike e cila do të zhvillohet në vitin e ardhshëm në qytetin tonë të Prishtinës, Manifesta. Rikthimin nuk duhet të mendohet vetëm në aspektin financiar. Sot diplomacia kulturore luan një rol të rëndësishëm në zhvillimin e politikës së jashtme dhe lirisht mund të them se sukseset e paracekura kanë luajtur po ashtu një rol të rëndësishëm në imazhin e vendit tonë dhe promovimin e Republikës së Kosovës. Andaj duke marrë parasysh këtë momentum, ne mendojmë se Prishtina Music Conference vjen si projekt shumë i rëndësishëm dhe nevojshëm pikërisht në këtë periudhë kohore dhe duhet të ndalem dhe t'i falenderoj një ekip të jashtëzakonshëm të njerëzve të cilët kanë punuar që ne sot jemi këtu në këtë ambient të bukur të Kino Armatës, ku është shfrytëzoj rastin me falendëruar edhe menaxhmentin e Kino Armatës, me Alushin dhe të gjithë ekipin, për t'ju falendëruar gjithashtu që e kanë bërë të mundshme që ne të jemi sot këtu në ditën e parë të Prishtina Music Conference. Po filloj me Djellzën, për të vazhduar pastaj me Ron Kurtullin, Rezartën, Fjollën, Uratën dhe në fund ne shoktonin dashur, kushtrim dushin. Ju falenderoj shumë edhe nëse ka mundësi një duar trokitje për ekipin e jashtëzakonshëm të Prishtina Music Conference. Ma herët i ceka kolektivet, njëri nga kolektivet i cili është krijuar para disa vite dhe është kolektivi Kultur, ku kom pas me qenë i pranishëm edhe unë si me thonë njëri prej themeluesve, bashkë me Ronin Kurtollin të cilën e kemi këtu, Ron Mullademin, Rob Searle dhe Denis Tortoshin. Qëllimi jonë ka qenë me kriju një sinergji e cila e ndërlidh edukimin dhe kulturën. Do me thonë, çka do të me bo na që me u fokusu në edukimin kulturë, në mënyrë që me apo hajrin në të ardhmen. Pra, jo me, se me thonë, tash e disa orë kur po marr fjalim gjithmonë po e citoj rilindasin ton të dashur Sami Frashëri, po më duhet me cek edhe këtu. Do të thonë ai qysh atëre ka thonë që nëse do me mbjell për një vit mbjell misër e grur, nëse do me mbjell për të njëjtën mbjell arsim dhe kulturë. Edhe kjo ka qenë, do me thonë, arsyeja pse na kemi kriju kulturë, me kriju një farë lloj urlidhse në mes të kolektive të ndryshme dhe bashkëpunim në mes të nivelit publik, si me thonë, edhe atij lokal, edhe qendror dhe me apo hajrin shoqënia në përgjithësi. E di që është e vështirë, e di që kemi probleme të jashtëzakonshme, por nëse e krahason shoqëninë tonë, kemi lind në farë mënyrë në vitin 99, në vitin 2008 ka qenë kur kemi hi në klasë të parë, tash në vitin 2021 kemi, domethënë, suksese të jashtëzakonshme siç e ceka edhe më herët, dhe po shpresoj që kemi më fokusu sa më shumë pikërisht te këto dy pika te edukimi dhe kultura. Për mos me vazhdu më shumë, ashtu siç e ceka më herët, profesori jon i dashtën Hedon Blakaj, i cili është pjesë e Alto University, në qëtu të shoh e kom pak më mirë, ligjeron në fushën e marketingut kulturor, bashkëpunëtori joni ka motshëm edhe në kulturë, djali i Prishtinës, na ndëron me ardhin e tij nga Helsinki i Finlandës dhe do të mbaj një prezantim me temën A Lesson on Taste. Ky prezantim vjen në bashkëpunim në mes të Prishtina Music Conference dhe kulturë. Hedoni do të na flas pra më shumë për ekonominë kulturore dhe çka duhet me bëna, siç e theka më herët, në mënyrë që me pas një strukturë të krijimit të grupeve të DJ dhe producentëve. Faleminderit shumë dhe shpresoj që kemi me kalu 2 ditë shumë të mira, e shpresoj që kemi me pas edicione të shumta të Prishtina Music Conference. Faleminderit.
Faleminderit për ftesën, faleminderit për prezantim, faleminderit ministër për pjesëmarrje. Gjithashtu edhe ju pjesëmarrës, e kam një emocion të shumë të veçantë që jam këtu me juve, kjo është hera parë prej që unë punoj në akademi që i drejtona një audiencë shqipfolse. Edhe kam shumë emocione për këtë punë. Edhe të ndaj edhe një emocion tjetër, sa filloj me lanë treja e gjithmonë e shiqoj listën e pjesëmarrësve me shpresën që ndoj shqiptar, ose shqiptar nga Kosova do t'jetë një listë, po s'ka ndodhur deri tash fatkeqësisht. Unë sa kuptova prezantimi duhet të jetë në gjuhën angleze, kështu që do konvertojmë gjuhën. Okay, so welcome. I understand that we have also guests, English-speaking guests here, so I want to welcome you. This is a great honor for me, and I really appreciate the invitation from you, Kushtrim, and your collaborators. So I have been doing research I work at the business school, I will show you later, but I work mostly with sociological theories to understand markets and market dynamics, and among other things I have also studied club cultures or subcultures, DJs, and so on and so on. So I will try to kind of discuss some topics or ideas that I think are relevant to Pristina and to Kosovo in general. So this is why I have named this presentation as the cultural economy of electronic dance music club cultures, and as a catching subtitle, if you will, what's taste got to do with it? So one of the questions that has been perplexing me for quite some time is when I moved to Finland, I recognized that a lot of local DJs are actually quite successful in their occupation. I have moved from to Finland maybe 15 years ago, and even then we had a very, very vibrant underground club culture here. But we never managed to kind of produce DJ producers. So that was a question that has been kind of with me ever since. So obviously I try to give few insights and try to maybe provide some sort of an understanding or an explanation why is this the case now. And as Adrian already mentioned, I work at this university called KULT University School of Business. This is in Finland. This is a relatively new university. Prior to KULT University, I used to belong to Helsinki School of Economics, but now together with School of Arts and Architecture and School of Technology, we have merged to form one institution. And the institution now is called KULT University after the Alvar Aalto, famous architect. When I speak about taste in general, I like to also take a detour and take myself as an exemplar or as an empirical example, because when you take other people, you run the risk of offending. So it's better to take a detour. So I always take myself as an example to show how, for example, your experiences over time may form these predispositions or dispositions for you to engage in certain cultural activities. So without spending a lot of time here, because I understand we don't have much, one of my experiences here is with underground music is hip-hop music. So I've been one of the first guys to run this show in Urban FM called Hip Hop Sulak, together with Leard Zecha, a friend of mine. So we ran this pro bono for many years. So, and you can see some of the CDs that belong to my collection are still alive. I used to have over 300 CDs for for quite some time that were like the backbone of the playlists at Urban FM, specifically at Hip Hop Sulak, or Naked Hip Hop, if you want to translate it. So I even had an email called sulak@hotmail.com. This is where people used to kind of write to me. So at that time, you know, we had all these like established hip hop groups like NR were like frequent guests at our show. This is before they released their first album. Another kind of experience with me comes with film, obviously. So in 2003, two friends of mine opened this DVD club in Pristina, downtown Pristina, and it was called Flash DVD Club. So I was quite a bit into film, but I never had kind of a very informed understanding of the history of the film and so on and so on. So and then this guy here, Alyush Gashi, comes along, right, and starts telling us, okay, have you watched this film? Do you know this director, and so on and so on. It is him actually that introduced us to the idea of following specific movie directors, right? So it is because of Alyush now that I'm into neo-noir as a favorite genre. So these experiences are also relevant in DJ culture, something that I will try to kind of maybe unpack a little bit. And then there is coffee as well, and I'm not going to speak about coffee because I have a totally different opinion to what most of you might have about the quality of coffee in Kosovo. So I used to compete also when I moved to Finland in coffee making, so these are also some of my experiences. But why I bring coffee here is because this is the first time that I'm introduced to materiality, to material objects, and the importance of material objects around specific cultures. So this is like the first time that I had some sort of an epiphany and started asking myself what's the importance of these material objects relative to a particular culture. So basically, yeah, I used to compete a little bit, and then what I learned is that actually the quality, if you will, of objects does matter a lot, as many of you already know when we speak about music. So wherever I go to conferences, the first thing I do is actually find the best coffee shop in town and then go there and experience a nice espresso. And then when I moved to Finland, right from here, I started studying there, but obviously I used to be quite, let's say, relatively popular in this town, so my levels of social capital were not effective there, so I had to kind of create a kind of a lot of friends, and the way I did that is through DJing, right? So I did like part-time DJing while I was studying. But then again, when I moved from here to there, I had a kind of a different understanding of music and underground club music in general. Then again, I met a lot of people, but among many people that I met is this guy called Jori Hulkonen, which is like a staple name in the underground club culture in Finland. So this is their main export, if you will. So when I used to drink coffee with him and talk about music, I realized that actually there is this level of intellectualism, if you will, that is like kind of undergirding or kind of informing a lot of his taste. So that was kind of again another epiphany or another moment for me to kind of rethink my choice about music and taste in music. So all these together, these experiences actually led me to kind of pursue a kind of my research interest on understanding underground club cultures. So this is my dissertation, and I finished this like 3 years ago, and it's called Assembling Club Cultures, Disc Jockeys as Cultural Intermediaries. So what I was like specifically interested in here is in people like Erzeni here, like Alushi and other guys, but mostly I was interested in myself because I was engaged in these cultural production activities. So I wanted to understand my role within that particular culture. Next thing, what I really wanted to understand is the role of materiality and what's the effect of materiality in kind of in and around different cultural fields or cultural production fields. And then obviously when you start doing research, you learn that you don't know much. So you need to read more and you learn that there are other concepts that are relevant. So I was like introduced to this idea of affect. That is like something that I'm very interested more recently in exploring. Because I come from a business school, I don't come from sociology or anthropology. We have to always explore and study cultural phenomena as they link to the market, right? But today I'm not going to speak about that. I'm going to speak about this latter point, which is the cultural economy and cultural entrepreneurship. So what can we do and what do we need to do in order to kind of accumulate this cultural capital, something that I will come to shortly, and then eventually convert it into a cultural entrepreneurship currency, right? So how do we make a living out of it? How do I create a profession out of the knowledge that I have accumulated and cultivated over the years while I was engaged with a particular culture? So that's the starting point. Then I ended up like doing ethnography for 3 years at this place here called KULT-URE in Helsinki. So it's a pretty minimalist, obviously very Nordic aesthetic. So I spent a lot of weekends here like taking notes and videos whenever I was allowed, and eventually I wrote up my dissertation. If there's someone here who has an academic background, these are the theoreticians that inform my dissertation. Basically, it's on my left-hand side is the French sociologist called Pierre Bourdieu, something that I will kind of a few concepts of him that I will use today to speak about cultural economy and taste in general. So again, when you start doing research in general, you have to always kind of understand the historical context that informs a particular culture. So for me, what that meant is like go back and read about the history and the evolution of the dance music cultures from early 80s or late 70s, early 80s until today. So what you see, for example, in the my left upper hand side, we have David Mancuso. This is like the father of, if you will, of electronic dance music culture. So he used to organize his events at his house, at his apartment in New York, and bring a lot of people. And the idea was just to listen to music. So everything was like sonic or sound focused. The reason why I brought him here is because now we have gone back to this idea of sonicity, to sound, and the idea of sound or the concept of sound is informing a lot of practices that are related around DJs and club cultures. How are we doing with time? So Larry Levan is the first DJ that actually, without Larry Levan, there would be no DJs. And basically we can move on maybe to kind of speak about the if you will, the market failure of a particular product, which is the Roland TBR 909. So if it were not for the failure, for the market failure of this particular product, there will be no house music as we know it today, right? So it's an important kind of artifact of the underground culture. The reason why I'm bringing them here, because the whole discourse around house music, techno music revolves around the articulation and mentioning of these kinds of objects. And later on, we have the kind of analog synthesizers. I understand someone will be speaking about analog sound shortly. So what do we have soon after? You know, we have a bunch of guys in Chicago and Detroit who come together and start experimenting with these gadgets. And what we have the emergence of new genres like Chicago House and Detroit House. Also, we have the emergence of DJs as a viable career path, obviously. And obviously, again, we have the new venues coming alive and new spaces that are organized around club cultures. And I'm going to do a fast forward here because of the time constraints. Then what we have a constant evolution, right? Then we have like the late 90s and early 2000s and the advent of the mega clubs. So around 2000, the dominant scene was the London scene, right? But you have to also understand a little bit kind of the context here. The context here is that this is the height of the liberalist ideology, right? So this is the promise of liberalism, this kind of overconsumption, overdoing, kind of the idea of kind of happily ever living life and so on and so on. But if we move forward for a decade or two, now a lot of people are kind of dissatisfied, if you will, with the liberalist kind of ideological promise because it never managed to kind of deliver. So what we have is now we have the shrinking of club cultures. And this is why I mentioned David Mancuso, because what we have now, we have this advent of new, small, localized spaces where people gather around and are predominantly organized around sound. So the sound is the dominating kind of pillar of everything that kind of revolves around underground club cultures. So, and what happened that we have this fragmentation, if you will, of these scenes. So we don't speak now about the London scene, the New York scene, the Berlin scene, but now we speak about micro scenes as well. So we have the Frankfurt scene, we have the Helsinki scene, we have the Amsterdam scene, we have the Utrecht scene, and so on and so on. We have the Pristina scene as well, right? So that's what is happening. So obviously, to jump now to the topic, the books or the concepts that inform some of my kind of discussion today come from Pierre Bourdieu, and specifically from the book on my right-hand side called The Field of Cultural Production, because Bourdieu gives you the conceptual tools to actually study cultural production phenomena, right? And what I will be predominantly interested in here is to look at these small fields of cultural production, which are kind of underground scenes, if you will, and the link with the field of power. And it's so great to have the minister here, because I think a minister through his institution can actually facilitate or maybe catalyze a lot of stuff that I have to say today. So how are scenes then characterized? So scenes obviously are characterized, as Bourdieu would have it, with a lot of people. And people will be hierarchically organized. So scenes are always a matter of status games. So the position of each individual within a field or a scene, if you will, is reflective on the levels of capital that the individual possesses. So to say, the level of symbolic capital. But symbolic capital can be broken down furthermore into cultural capital, social capital, and economic capital. For Bourdieu and for the fields of small-scale production, for the underground scenes, the cultural capital is the most important capital one can have. Because in the fields of small-scale cultural production, the idea of money doesn't exist. So Bourdieu used to say that fields of small-scale production are fields of sans capital, without money. So, you know, once you start mentioning the money, you are kind of immediately, you will be labeled as a sellout. Okay, so why these concepts are important? Because it is through these concepts that we invest or we culturalize, as you mentioned, one of our Rilinda's main figures. So, and then it is by accumulating this knowledge that we come also to discriminate and to speak about certain objects in a particular way. So cultural capital comes in 3 different forms, which is the embodied form. Basically, that's the knowledge or what you know about something. embodied knowledge or what is important in the field. So this over that. So once you articulate something like that, you are kind of drawing on a specific set of knowledge that is relevant to a specific scene or field. Then it's the objectified form and the institutional form. In fields of small-scale production, the institutional form is like not very relevant. I don't want to say irrelevant, but not very relevant, because in expressive aesthetic fields, all that matters is cultural capital. But what I want to bring and discuss a little bit more is this objectified form of capital, and as a way of kind of inhibiting or maybe acting as some sort of a buffer that is not allowing a lot of people to convert their cultural capital or their knowledge into institutional capital. And then there's the social capital. This is kind of a pretty simple term, you know, whom you know, and so on and so on. And the economic capital, obviously. So the idea is always to kind of, in cultural kind of underground cultures, if you will, you develop and accrue cultural capital, but eventually you should be able to convert this this knowledge into a profession and then make a living out of it. That is the economic capital. But again, going back to the club culture, so what we have now with underground culture is this kind of focus on sonicity, on sound, right? So everything becomes about sound, okay? And obviously the investment on the idea of sound varies from scene to scene globally, but everything revolves around like speaking about sound. So taste now, going back to the concepts that I just mentioned, because Bourdieu has a very kind of complex kind of definition of taste. So taste, he says, classifies and classifies the classifier, which means basically is that depending on your levels of capital, you speak about an object in a particular way, but the way you speak about the object tells a lot about you. So classifies the classifier. So it's always, according to his kind of conceptual apparatus, you're always articulating a certain level of capitals when speaking about something, when making judgments about something. So I'm going to move now to speak about club cultures and what kind of capitals are relevant to club cultures. So in the embodied form, if you will, the capital is always field specific. So what do you need to know? Like deep knowledge about history of the EDM. I try to kind of invoke this idea a little bit by kind of speaking about the history of underground club cultures. Deep knowledge about genres and subgenres. This is like crucial to the underground club cultures globally now. Deep knowledge about institutional figures like famous DJs, as Adrian mentioned, few of them that were frequenting one of our clubs here, and their taste and aesthetics informing their music production. This is like very important because you have to be able to discriminate what kind of equipment are being used to produce a particular track, for example. So then when you hear people speak about articulate cultural capital, they always kind of mention names like Chicago House, right? They know about their aesthetic taste, they know about disco samples, they know about which type of drum machines is being used, whether there's an influence of Italo disco, whether what kind of aesthetic motifs, for example, are used if they are inspired by the Balearic beat, and so on and so on. So like kind of people that have high levels of cultural capital are kind of immediately are able to recognize these motifs and make judgments about particular tracks. And so on with other genres and subgenres like Detroit techno, or sub-variants of house music like New York style, French house, Dutch house, and so on and so on. So for a lot of DJs that I have kind of spent time with and observed and studied and interviewed over the years, they tend to have high levels of objectified cultural capital, right? So they have vast collections of vinyl records, right? And then they also have specific equipment that they have at their homes or their basements, which are like very analog based, and now more than ever today, especially in Finland, they are geared around like sonicity. So every equipment that is bought is to kind of generate and produce that sound that is satisfying for that person. And then in this institutional capital, for example, by and large, comes in the form of kind of record production. You know, how many releases you have, success of the releases. If you are not producing records, then you can be a record owner or label owner, and that also gives you institutional capital in the field. So all these concepts that I try to articulate a little bit are always kind of used in social interaction. So when DJs come together and when they speak about music, they kind of invoke a similar structure. So I have a video here that I would like to show at least a few snippets, and I hope you will be able to appreciate the similar kind of structural linguistic elements that are used to speak about music. Okay, so I hope the sound will work.
So what up, it's your boy DJ House, just landed in Amsterdam for Fact TV. About to head off down to Utrecht to hang out with the Slap Funk Records crew, find out a little bit about what they're about. First of all, we're going to head into Amsterdam, check out a couple of people doing some interesting things within the Dutch house scene. Let's do it. So we're down at Studio 80 with my boy Dan Groeneveld. I wanted to catch up with Dan because he runs a really cool label called Tomorrow's Now Kids. He's been involved in like the Amsterdam, kind of like the real Dutch house.
Actually, when I started DJing, from the beginning on, I was really into the old school sound. I was digging around on SoundCloud and everything, and then that's when I found Jeremy Underground Paris. Yeah. And I must name his name because he was like, for me, like a door opener to something I was looking for quite a long time.
Tell us a little bit about Tomorrow's Now Kids and who you run it with and everything.
Yeah, Tomorrow's Now, I think the first important thing to mention is I'm not running it on my own. Yeah. It's actually Alex Salvador who is like the main man. He really runs the label and I have more like an advising role. Okay. And I do like the A&R, so the artist and repertoire. I'm on SoundCloud digging, thing what I like to do most, digging for artists, digging for new music. We're not focusing on one sound. We really like to keep it quite broad and to be able to release everything we like. So if it's Chicago-ish, then we release that. If it's Detroit-ish, we release it, and New York-ish as well, of course.
We can come to you.
I think this one is nice because I know you call it the Utrecht sound, and I think this is what you call the Utrecht sound. For me, it's like the New York sound, but call it whatever you want to call it, man.
Yeah. I mean, obviously it is the New York sound, but it's the sound. What I found interesting is the sound when I came here is the sound that everybody loves, and you know, you play records like this and people just go crazy. And I was just like, from coming from like London, where I love this kind of music, and there's not. You know, there are cool DJs that play this shit or whatever, but, you know, there are nights dedicated to this that have such a loyal following. And people that go there just have a great time, drink some beers, dance with girls or boys or whatever, and just have a wicked time. And it's sick, you know what I mean? So, yeah, go on.
Actually, this one is the first production by, or the first release by Terrence Parker. Okay. And, this is like a classic for some people, but for me, it stays good all the time. Let me check. It really has the labels from Detroit, but this is really the Chicago groove. Exactly, the 707 stuff. I like this a lot.
Yeah, and the phase and everything.
Yeah, exactly.
So obviously, the whole discourse is about knowledge about music, how nerdy you are about music, knowing artists, where they come from, what kind of a taste they have, what kind of aesthetic they have, and so on and so on. So that's what I observed when I was like studying these cultures in general. There is kind of a total investment in the field, like deep investment, and that's like very prolonged process. It takes a lot of time to kind of accumulate and accrue this kind of knowledge. So that was just an idea. So. Obviously, what was happening in the discussion, whenever you engage in club cultures in debating or exercising taste, if you will, you are kind of deploying your levels of cultural capital. Those are your weapons. So basically what happened in this video, DJ House, which is a big household name in England and also globally now, is being out-nerded by this Utrecht guy, right? Because he knows some of the tracks that he didn't know. Always taste or cultural capital is articulated against the meanings that are characteristic to the field or a scene, obviously. Taste, if you want to speak about taste, it can always be understood by recourse to the concept of cultural capital if we want to use Bourdieu. Okay, so embodied capital, there's always a codified dialogue between the two DJs, so there's always a code that informs the way they speak and how they speak about stuff. So who is like more knowledgeable depends on the levels of capital again. And then there is the objectified form. You see the material part, record collection, studio production gear, and so on and so on. And I want to focus on this one because I think this is where we are kind of struggling, and it's not necessarily, it has nothing to do with individuals or with people here. This is actually, it's a systemic kind of issue, if you will. So it doesn't depend on the individual to say again. So it doesn't matter how much you want to do if you don't have the gear to kind of produce, for example, music, it can't happen. So it's the capital, for example, in the objectified form is reflective of a larger, maybe not so socio, but economic structure that we have here in place. So not many people can afford to buy gear that is very, very expensive. Now, when we mention the idea of sound and sonicity, so you cannot buy just any other gear because your production will not be successful. Because you will have these cultural intermediaries that will kind of filter the music that goes through the market, and they will say, okay, I don't like the sound because it's made with laptops or something like that. So there has to have some sort of an analog, specific analog aesthetic and element component to it. So, and this is kind of the, if you will, the kind of the hurdle or the obstacle for a lot of DJs here, I think, right? Because it's very difficult for them to invest 20, 30, 40, 50,000 euros in a studio, right? And it's difficult to convert the levels of cultural capital into institutional capital or into some sort of an entrepreneurship activity. And this is why, for example, we need these bigger institutions that I have kind of linked. We need to go to the field of power. This is why we need governmental bodies to help with these kinds of activities, because governmental bodies can probably have the power and means to facilitate and catalyze these kind of processes. I really like the concept of catalysis. So all you need is create a small space with a small studio with well equipped, and perhaps maybe bring a few people who are already retiring now, who are like institutional figures, who are kind of established figures globally, to kind of give you lectures or something like that in production. And kick off this activity and help these people convert these levels of capital that they have accrued over time and produce music, right? It's very important for us to kind of also have the household figures in the field of underground club culture. We already have that in film, right? You know, because the households, they become iconic figures of the culture, so they are like the ideals that we look up to when we make music. But mentioning that, for example, just buying the studio and investing in the gear is not enough, because you know this kind of a hub, if you will, becomes a very important platform through and in which taste is being articulated, right? So you. What I would be kind of worried here is that you can't let just anyone to guide this institution. It has to kind of be well thought of. So that is something we could potentially do, and hopefully maybe the minister here can think about these ideas if you haven't already, obviously. To finish up this presentation now, because I've been speaking about only underground club cultures, but cultural capital is something that it is field specific, but field-related capitals have different levels of transferability. And this is very important to understand when you speak about economy, cultural economies in general. So they, for example, just because you are investing yourself in music culture doesn't mean that you cannot convert that level of cultural capital in other fields and be successful in other fields. Like, for example, food, leisure, or something similar. So capitals in general tend to be converted and are more kind of homologous with specific adjacent or nearby fields. So I understand we have only a few minutes to go, right? So I was quite short, so I want to thank you, and maybe we can take a question or two if that's the agenda. I would be more than willing to answer, and if I know. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. I had one question. For this to make sense, what do we have to start doing as a collective, as an urban collective? What should we start doing? Even though you have things, but they're very minimal. Minimal in a sense that the next topic that's going to be, it's how the hyper-capitalistic culture just overwhelms you with everything. Just gets on top of you, you know. It's like a thick carpet on top of everything. So in your, from your perspective, from your knowledge, from your everything you have to say, which is fucking fantastic, what do you think we should do? Please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned capitalism or hyper-capitalism. I don't think that capitalism is an essential category. You make capitalism as you wish. So if you invest yourself in the field, as Bourdieu would have it, you develop levels of cultural capital. Remember, you're working within the small fields of cultural production, so there will always be a kind of tendency to shun away money. And this is why a lot of DJs are quite often poor, you know. But what, for example, we can do in general collectively is maybe provide this platform where a lot of people can convert that capital into a viable career path, for example. That doesn't mean that many will make it, but some of them will eventually. Because I think, I have this belief, I know it's biased, but I think that we are a very talented nation, you know. We just lack these platforms to kind of exercise our abilities. And that doesn't come as a surprise because we have so many famous and successful people now abroad, you know. And why? Because one reason is because they have this infrastructure, they have this materiality through which they can kind of convert their capital, capital or cultural capital in some sort of a I don't know, object or something. So you make your world.
Okay, so we have a question right here.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you for the presentation. That was very interesting. So I was just wondering, because it sounded to me like you were suggesting that DJs needed kind of equipment. But nowadays, with the internet, anyone really can download a program and can start kind of playing around, meeting people online, creating mixes, uploading it to platforms. And do you think this can be a way to really start by yourself without the environment changing? Because I believe that it will be ideal that the environment, society, or the governments will give us more tools, but we can always work with individuals as well.
Yeah, that's a good question and a relevant one, because I kept repeating the fields of small-scale production, right? So that would be no problem in the fields of large-scale production, right? In these mass markets. And I think we already have a pretty famous DJ from the city of Ferizaj who is doing like computer-based music. So he is fine here in the field of large-scale production, but because the culture is coded around specific aesthetics and ideals, so not everything goes here. So here, if the culture now revolves around sonicity and sound, and then we speak about analog by and large, then not anything goes. So it's the culture that dictates more or less what is valuable and how it's valuable. I hope I understand. I answered your question.
Okay. Dikush tjetër? Anyone else? Any question? So yeah.
I barely see you from the spotlights.
Okay, atëre faleminderit shumë krejtve. E përfundum, si më thonë, pjesën e parë të ditës së parë. Tash e kemi një pauzë për të vazhdu prapë përsëri me diskutimin tjetër. Faleminderit shumë. Thank you so much to everyone for being here. Yeah.